Hey, I'm Gianna Prudenti.
And I'm Jermaine Jackson Gadsden. We're the hosts of Let's Talk Offline from LinkedIn News and iHeart Podcasts.
There's a lot to figure out when you're just starting your career. That's where we come in.
Think of us as your work besties you can turn to for advice.
And if we don't know the answer, we bring in people who do, like negotiation expert Maury Taheri-Poor.
If you start thinking about negotiations as just a conversation, then I think it sort of eases us a little bit.
Listen to Let's Talk Offline on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, I'm Jacqueline Thomas, the host of a brand new Black Effect original series, Black Lit, the podcast for diving deep into the rich world of Black literature. Black Lit is for the page turners, for those who listen to audiobooks while running errands or at the end of a busy day. From thought-provoking novels to powerful poetry, we'll explore the stories that shape our culture. Listen to Black Lit on the Black Effect Podcast Network, iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Essie Cupp, and I've spent my career interviewing people about politics, presidential elections, and some really tough breaking news. But now I need a break, and I think you do too. So on my new podcast, Off the Cup, I'll still be interviewing people, usually famous and most likely my friends, but about life. You know, the stuff that consumes us when we're not consumed by politics. So come join me every Wednesday for some conversational self-care. Listen to Off the Cup on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite shows.
There's a lot of talk about mindfulness these days, which is fantastic. I mean, we all want to be more present and self-aware. More patient, less judgmental. We discuss all these themes on the podcast, but it's hard to actually be mindful in your day-to-day life. That's where Calm comes in. I've been working with Calm for a few years now with the goal of making mindfulness fun and easy. Calm has all sorts of content to help you build positive habits, shift your self-talk, reframe your negative thoughts, and generally feel better in your daily life. So many incredible options from the most knowledgeable experts in the world, along with renowned meditation teachers. You can also check out my 7-minute daily series to help you live more mindfully each and every day. Right now, listeners of On Purpose get 40% off a subscription to Calm Premium at calm.com/J. That's CALM.com/JAY for 40% off. Calm your mind, change your life.
1/3 of our lives is potentially spent dreaming. Your waking life is feeding your dream life. That's a solar flare from your brain in a unique state that you can't get to during the day.
Dual-trained brain surgeon and neuroscientist,
Dr. Rahul Jandial.
The measurements of emotion in our dreaming brain can reach a top speed our waking brain can never reach. How are you processing, how are you metabolizing the most difficult thing in your day?
Hey everyone, I've got some huge news to share with you. In the last 90 days, 79.4% of our audience came from viewers and listeners that are not subscribed to this channel. There's research that shows that if you want to create a habit, make it easy to access. By hitting the subscribe button, you're creating a habit of learning how to be happier, healthier, and more healed. This would also mean the absolute world to me and help us make better, bigger, brighter content for you and the world. Subscribe right now.
The #1 health and wellness podcast.
Jay Shetty.
Jay Shetty.
The one, the only Jay Shetty.
Hey everyone, welcome back to On Purpose, the #1 health podcast in the world. Thanks to each and every one of you that come back every week to listen, learn, and grow. I'm so excited because we've really been tapping here at On Purpose into things you're fascinated about, questions that you're thinking about, topics you're exploring, themes that you're wondering about. And this was one of those that I can't wait to share with you. This has been a theme I've been fascinated about. We're talking to the expert, the person who's thinking about it differently, who's open to the idea of this truly being discovery, all based on curiosity. Dr. Rahul Jandial is a dual-trained brain surgeon and neuroscientist at City of Hope in Los Angeles. Dr. Jandial leads the Jandial Lab, which explores the intersection of neurobiology and cancer. As part of his nonprofit that he founded, he teaches and performs pediatric neurosurgery in charity hospitals in South America and Eastern Europe. Today, we're talking about his newest book, out now, This Is Why You Dream. Welcome to the show, Rahul Jandial. Rahul, It's great to see you.
Pleasure's mine.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, I'm really grateful. Like I said to you, honestly, this is usually when we're doing an interview, I'm like, all right, I'm going to, I've got certain questions. I'm going to go with the flow. And the amount of questions we've had from our team, our audience, our community, it's never happened before. I'm just telling you that. And so you're going to see me reading out questions from real people who've sent them in for you to understand more about dreaming, which I think is probably one of the most undiscovered, untapped, misunderstood, or completely ununderstood areas of our life. So let's dive straight into it. And the first question I have for you is, does everyone dream?
I think so. So here's how I would describe it. I would first say, let's bust a major myth that dreaming and sleep is a time of rest for our brains. Our brains are not resting while we sleep. Just imagine somebody lying down. And when they're sleeping, the heart is flickering a little bit of electricity from the EKG that we put on the surface of their heart. We put a bunch of stickers on the surface of the scalp, and there's vibrant electricity while we're sleeping. The electricity our brain generates while we sleep is as hot as the electricity our brains are generating now. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the heart, when it's pushing up the blood, the brain is mopping up glucose. It's burning hot metabolically. So inside our skull, while we're lying down, even though we don't remember a lot of it, we're burning hot and we're sparking electricity. So people who remember their dreams and people who don't remember their dreams, that brain is still sparking hot and generating a lot of electricity. So I think it's more of memory recall in the morning. At the same time, we all know about a nightmare. So we've all had one dream. The question is, why do some people dream more, dream less, or remember their dreams more, remember their dreams less? And that's something I think is related to the variety of human experience. We don't hold our waking thoughts to the same rigid contours, right? So our dreamscape, our dream life is individual between us. And we remember more when we're younger, we remember less as we get older. And then in certain diseases, dreams come to the rescue. And it seems now that at the end of life, like with my cancer patients, dreams return, and they're filled with reconciliation. You would think in their struggle, like, they would be dark, but they're actually positive. So those patterns of dreams are there. The brain electricity is firing while we sleep, and that's the sort of foundation from which I try to find meaning in dreaming.
Absolutely. I mean, the book is called "This Is Why You Dream." Why do we dream, and why is it important for us to understand why we dream? Because I think a lot of people say, "Yeah, I dream sometimes I don't. Who cares? What's the big deal?" But I'm fascinated by it. I know a lot of people are. So why do we dream? And why is it important to try to understand why we dream?
It's not a big deal. It's completely off for those people who think it. If they understand 1/3 of our lives is potentially spent dreaming, and the brain shuts us down,
answer.
Right? It's just 1/3. Like, that can't be passive.
Yeah.
And it puts you down, right? Like, you get sleep pressure. Like, I gotta sleep. Well, when I was in training, in surgical training, we'd skip a night of sleep. What happens when somebody skips a night of sleep? The next night, they dream harder and earlier. If I can be so bold, I think sleep is for the brain. It's not for our thigh muscle. It's not for our liver. There are some metabolic changes. I'm not discounting all of it. But the real thing driving us to sleep is our brain. What does our brain do just vibrantly when we sleep? It's dream. So that's like my straight up answer about, like, that thing, that's not happening on accident, right? That's not a glitch. That didn't last through 30,000 generations accidentally. And so then the question becomes, if we have this vibrant 1/3 of our lives that we partially remember, sometimes is an exciting journey, sometimes an erotic journey, sometimes it's a nightmare, like, what's that all about, And the way I've come to understand it is, first, giving respect to people who've tried to come up with some ideas. Like, it's a threat rehearsal. If we're running from a woolly mammoth in our dreams, we're better prepared for it during the day. What I would say is maybe. And when I say maybe or likely, it's out of respect for you and your listeners. I don't want to be that guy that comes in here and says, yes, no, about something as big and magical as dreaming. So threat rehearsal, maybe. Some people think it's a nocturnal therapist because towards the morning, when we have more of our vivid dreams, the emotional balance, the valence they call it, tends to be more positive. Maybe. I like to think of it as something that sparks creativity because of what happens with the dreaming brain. The dreaming brain looks for looser dots to connect. It's imaginative by design. Logic is dampened down. So I think it's our creativity engine. And then the way I put it all together is with something straight up called use it or lose it that people know about when we talk about the brain, right? They say, hey, use it or lose it. We know if we don't use our biceps, they atrophy. But our day, if you look at the brain activation electricity, is so narrow. The brain wants to be efficient, right? Because it's an energy hog. It's only like 4 or 5 pounds, but it uses 20% of our blood. So the brain during the day to navigate the world, task on, outward, executive network logic wants to be efficient, driving down the 101 easily, going on the tube easily, not have to activate everything to get that done. If we only use those limited parts of our brain during the day and didn't have some way to high intensity train them, those would go derelict. We wouldn't use them and we may lose them. So I think in the biggest way possible is that dreaming process, dreams and dreaming, is high intensity training for our brain. It keeps those corners engaged. It keeps those neurons firing that might not during the day. And those are available to us the next day for a creative process, for the next day or the next year or the next generation for an adaptive process. That's my biggest, most romantic way of thinking about, about why we dream so hard.
Yeah, I like the maybe because I think we've all had different dreams that you feel you had for different reasons. And there are some dreams that you did feel were like you said, like your nocturnal therapist, this feeling of like, okay, I'm healing, I'm learning.
You're working something out.
Yeah, you're working something out. I've definitely had dreams where I feel like, oh my gosh, like this feels like it's mirroring my reality and I'm either preparing or I'm dealing with it internally. And I think you're so right that there's so many different processes and it's hard to nail it down to one. Is there a way to start to label and define, or do you think that's unhealthy when it comes to dreaming?
Perfect question. So to the maybe, I'll add likely. You know, not yes and not no. When it comes, my dream, your dream, infinitely wild. Okay. But what happens when you start looking at 10,000 dreams? What happens when you start? So I'm over here. So there is no like professor of dream science, right? So when I was like, when they asked me, the publisher asked me, like, can you put a book together about this? I think we were vibing about this before we went live with this or recording with this. And it was like, they're like, you wrote this thing about the brain, like, you know, smart drugs, Alzheimer's, creativity. Then you wrote this thing about the mind, like resilience and trauma and belief and about your own struggles. Why don't you put together something about dreams from a scientific perspective that everybody can read? And I was like, there are going to be so many gaps. And they said, then let us know where the gaps are. Say maybe, say likely, and say I wonder, I believe. And that's what I've tried to do in the book. But to your question about when I started this process, when I looked at not your dream, my dream, but 10,000 dreams, Aristotle was writing about lucid dreaming. A couple hundred years ago, they're still writing about being chased or falling. And I was like, wait a second. There are patterns to dream reports. Like now they have dream banks. So the first thing I noticed was nightmares and erotic dreams are essentially universal. And I say essentially because it's 90 plus in this world is considered 100, right? Because that's just how science works when you look at questionnaires and surveys. So everybody's had a nightmare. Erotic dreams are almost all the way up there. And then chasing, falling, falling teeth, that seems to be common. And then there was a dream that was very rarely reported, doing math. Now, I don't like math, so I was like, that's all good for me. But you start, when you look at lots of thousands of dreams, you're like, why is that one so low? Then now walk with me over here. Then you start looking at brain scans and brain electricity. And what happened, what's the difference between the waking brain and the dreaming brain, right? In a 24-hour cycle, we're about 2/3 waking brain and 1/3 dreaming brain. And there's some transition zones that I love, like I call them liminal states or blurry zones that we can get into. But that when you see that and you say, well, what's the difference? I started off with like, they're both burning hot. They're both sparkling electricity. So what's the difference? So when you go from waking brain to dreaming brain, what happens is the need to look outward changes, right? And so the executive network, a collection of structures, not just one thing, dampens logic and math ability dampen. They don't turn off. Nothing turns off in the brain. Otherwise, you'd have a stroke. So it dampens. The imagination network and the emotional systems called the limbic structures are liberated. So if we know now that the dreaming brain, as a measurement, not my opinion, right? We can talk about opinions, but this is a measurement. If the dreaming brain has dampened logic and reason and math, liberated emotion, hypervisual, it kind of makes sense why we don't see a lot of math. Because that part of the brain that does that is taking a back seat while we dream. So I said, okay, even if that's the only thing I can say in this book, and some youngster 10, 20, 30 years from now takes more data from dream banks that are more inclusive and bringing in more people, that patterns of how we dream, and what we dream can be explained by the brain. And that, to me, that was fascinating. So dreams are not limitless. Yours is, mine is. But when you look at a lot of them, nightmares happen universally. Erotic dreams happen essentially universally. And then we find very emotional, visual, movement-based dreams.
That's fascinating. I mean, you don't even think about it that way. And I think so often it's interesting because it's a microcosm of how we live our lives. Like we live our lives thinking, no one understands me, no one knows what I'm going through, only I have this experience. And then all of a sudden, when you zoom out and you look at the patterns, you're like, wait a minute, we're all struggling with the same thing. I was just talking to someone earlier and we were talking about how like we seem to be the problem solvers in our families. And then you start realizing how, wait a minute, we're all trying to solve the same problems. We're dealing with the same emotions. And those patterns are so useful in finding. So have they basically looked at dream patterns and then looked at stress patterns and lifestyle patterns? Like, is that what you're measuring them against, or what are the patterns being measured against? So if out of the 10,000 people, 9,000 people dreamt about their teeth falling out, what then are we measuring in their life to make sense of that dream?
Yeah, that's a great question. And also we tend to fall into the same traps, right? I think that looking at brain science shows that, yes, we're individuals, but what's driving us and what's holding us back is also something we share. That's why these conversations, that's why a certain book or a certain song or certain interaction can kind of liberate you. And so the way I would explain this is the dream patterns that they're looking at, and when I say they, I mean 20, 40 years of different studies. I'm trying to stitch it together. Let me give you a specific one. There was one survey questionnaire where women going through divorce, when their dreams, they were reconciling in their dreams that things were breaking up and people were moving on. Those as a group tended to recover from divorce better. And so when you just look and you just say, okay, that's very interesting. Those that were struggling in their dreams were also ones more likely to have depression longer. And so what that does to me is that invites a conversation. So does the dream or the dreaming brain kind of give a clue to how well you're coping with your real waking life stress? That by itself is powerful. That one, it knows about it. It ain't some other brain. It's your brain. It's just in this dreaming mode. So it knows about it. Your waking life is feeding your dream life. I mean, 6, 7, 8 hours. How are you processing? How are you digesting? How are you metabolizing the most difficult thing in your day? And I think that's where I love it, is that it's not distinct, and that the dreaming brain can be your shepherd. It can be the thing that helps you process emotional trauma. And for people with PTSD, it can actually play back flashbacks. So it's a wild space that leans emotional, leans visual. Let me give you a second example. With my patients, end-of-life cancer patients, dreams are expansive, positive, filled with reconciliation as they're asking for surgery and all that. You would think they're all going to be horrific because it's dark time.
Stress as well.
Stress, right?
Yeah.
You would think day stress is turned into dreaming stress, but the connection is not clear. And that's where I think there's power in our dream life. I think in general, when I look at all the surveys, dreaming is our shepherd. At the end of life, I think nightmares and erotic dreams cultivate the young mind, much like our minds are cultivated in adolescence. Dreams mirror and reflect what's going on during our life. For example, pregnancy dreams. Women who are pregnant, their dreams are very different, rolling over in bed, what the babies are going to be called. So sometimes waking anxiety and dream anxiety clearly linked. I got to give a talk tomorrow. I got a dream I'm showing up naked. I got an exam alarms. Sometimes they're clear. Sometimes they're your companion pregnancy dreams, end-of-life dreams. Sometimes they're just junk. Not everything's going to make sense, right? Our waking life doesn't make sense. So I think when you start to look at those categories, the fourth category being universal dreams, nightmares and erotic dreams in children, then the one we're left with that the one that now I spend even more time with is that hyper emotional, hyper visual that lingers into the next day. What I would say is don't let that one go. That's a solar flare from your brain in a unique state that you can't get to during the day. Hyper emotional, hyper liberated. The measurements of emotion in our dreaming brain can reach a top speed our waking brain can never reach. So for me, when I look at the whole thing, the hyper emotional, hyper visual with a central image is a dream that is broken out from your dream life that is about you, that a therapist can't get to. I mean, it's your brain conjured it. And that's one to reflect on. What I would say is like, not every time, not everyone, but in our search for wellness and healing, that's a free and accessible portal. And when I was working on this book with the UK publishers, there were like 7 or 8 people who were like, we're dreaming more. We're remembering our dreams more. Some had lucid dreams. So that's the second thing I would say is that this can be induced and cultivated. You're not a passenger with your dream life. And what you remember from your dream life, you can also cultivate that. You're not a passenger at that stage either.
Hey everyone, it's Jay here. My wife and I have had so much fun creating our own sparkling tea, Junie. And I've got big news for you. It's at Target and we'd love your support. If you can go out, grab a Junie, you'll be adding adaptogens and nootropics into your life with mood-boosting properties aimed at promoting a balanced and happy mind. Through our commitment to our wellness journey and striving to fuel our bodies with the healthiest ingredients, it's been our purpose to make healthy choices accessible for all, which is why Junie is now on shelves at Target. So head to our store locator at drinkjunie.com and find Junie at a Target near you. Let's talk about that a little. So I was going to ask you, if you don't remember your dream, i.e. if you don't make the subconscious conscious, does that mean that it doesn't have an effect? And are you encouraging us to take time to actually make the subconscious conscious and reflect on our dreams?
I would say the first question is, I can't answer that fully. The second question is absolutely try to engage your dream life. Sleep entry, when you go from waking to dreaming like Salvador Dali did, or Christopher Nolan's talking about Inception. Sleep exit, which we can get into, lucid dreaming. The answer to the question, should we engage our dream life? Yes, yes, yes. I got a lot of science on that. I got a lot of personal experience on that.
Let's dive into that. I mean, there's so many things I want to talk about, but seeing as we've gone there now, let's dive into it now. So let's talk about the process of being more of a proactive leader in our dreams and not a passenger in our dreams. What does that look like? Because I would argue that anyone I talk to, we're all passengers in our dreams. We simply go to bed. We may remember, we may not remember. We show up. It's like a car journey. You jumped in the car, you went to sleep for a bit, you got to the other side. Maybe you remember a tree you saw along the way, or your mom and dad did something when you were a kid, but you don't remember most of it, and it doesn't really matter.
You're in the driver's seat of a car you can't control. It seems that way. That one we'll get to with lucid dreaming. But how you can affect your dreams, because we've gotten into the science, I believe they're relevant. Let's take this first stage. You go from waking to dreaming, right? Whatever time that is, not every time, not for everyone, but just the fact that it's possible, that's something called sleep entry, okay? With those surface electrodes on our scalp, the electricity blends. It's like a liminal state. Like I used to be a scuba diver when you go from a freshwater river to an ocean, it's not like there's a crisp line, there's a blurry zone. Similarly, when we go from waking to dreaming, there's about a 10-15 minute period called sleep entry. Salvador Dali and some current tech companies in San Francisco, they believe that during that period, you kind of sort of have access to that divergent creative ideation of dreaming, and that they can extract ideas from there. So much so, Thomas Edison with the light bulb would fall asleep in a chair, and when he'd fall asleep and he'd startle himself awake, he'd write down what he was thinking. That was a scene in Inception, right? So I'll bring the science in, but that's there. Christopher Nolan's talking about that. Salvador Dali wrote a book about that. You know, his stuff is real, and so what that period is the first entry into dream life that you can still hold on to. And what we're finding is that people have more interesting ideas. They have more divergent thinking and creative ideas at that window. But to be clear, your trouble at work, you got to create a project. Is that going to guarantee it? No, but it's a habit of respecting that transition liminal zone as a portal to a state your brain is not in when you're awake or not in when you're dreaming, right? So that's one thing that people can do to cultivate. In that same area, some people feel and report, questionnaires and surveys, not measurements, that what you think about at that time will be more likely to populate your dream life, whether you remember or not, and may lead to the aha moment the next day. Let me give you a specific example. I'm a cancer surgeon. Cancer eats up blood vessels and tissue in different ways. On challenging cases, I'll flip the images through as the last thing I go to bed thinking about. And somebody asked me this in London. They said, well, did you dream of surgery? I said, no, I've never dreamt. I've never dreamt of surgery, but I have a lot of dreams of scuba diving, navigating mazes, going through forests.
Wow.
And so what I concluded, is my opinion, is that it's a three-dimensional space. And I know I'm working on a three-dimensional creative project, and that my dream life is somehow rehearsing that, practicing that, providing me with that maneuver in a complex surgery. When I say, man, that was, where did that come from? Sometimes I think it wasn't like, in this scenario 6, I will come up with solution 4.
Yeah.
No, like things arise during our waking life. And I think the dreaming brain builds that. So sleep entry for waking up intentionally and writing down your thoughts and journaling at that moment. Journaling in general about what you want to dream about. For me, looking at pictures about a surgery, those are specific things as you fall asleep that somebody can try.
Wow. That's fascinating because I think journaling's taken off so much in culture. But
I'm trying to bring some science to it.
I think the act of journaling straight after waking up, like immediately, I know for a fact that if I pick up my phone first thing in the morning, which I try to avoid to do, but when it does happen, I forget my dream immediately.
Yeah.
Like I know I wake up kind of in a dream state and then I completely shut it off. Have you found links between going to sleep with your phone or without your phone and how that affects our dreams? Or if you watch a particular show and TV, and how does that affect your dream? And what you do in the morning, does that have any correlation? Or?
So that's a great question. The thing you said about waking up, I'll get to that as sleep exit because there's some interesting science there. But when you're looking at all these surveys, that's why I open up with like, we need more dream banks. We need people who have a greater exposure to social media to start talking about their dreams. At this point, it doesn't look like they populate. Dreams, for example, let's take a specific example. Erotic dreams tend to be about a narrow group of people in your life. Family, even when you're younger, repellent bosses and celebrities. So I'm curious to see, like, right, like, so now that doesn't mean there's 100 papers on that, but those are that's the sprinkling of information that I saw. Like, so what becomes familiar
Wait, you
to
said
us?
Bosses?
Well, you know, people can have like awkward dreams about bosses, right? They have sexual dreams about people they actually are not attracted to. So that's a big category in erotic dreams. But
is there any reasoning to that specifically? Because of being erotic dreams about people you're not attracted to? Like, where does that come from?
Oh, I don't know. I think now we're getting into opinion.
Yeah.
I think it's a power dynamic play, and I think intimacy can be both collaborative and also a power dynamic and some mix of it all, right? But that's an exploration. But erotic dreams, since we're there, and we'll get back to sleep exit, is they're interesting. We all get them. They come before we've done the erotic act, even if we haven't seen it. So it's almost like an instruction, if you will. An inheritance of thinking, not just risk-taking or mental health, but we inherit those dreams, even if people who never go on to have, they still have erotic dreams, almost like a playbook that's meant for our mind to activate our brain and bodies for the act to procreate. That's the big topic. The specific thing is, across cultures, different over generations, the percentages are surprisingly similar, 90 plus. The other surprising thing is that 80 to 90% in these reports, infidelity. Cheating is common in erotic dreams. Whether you're in a healthy relationship, whether you're lying about in a healthy relationship and coveting somebody else, or whether you're in a bad relationship, it's almost like a semi-built-in thing. And I think that's how I've learned to think about erotic dreams is that's just desire. It's like a flare of desire. It, interestingly, tends to be toward a narrow group, but the acts tend to be wild.
There's a few points that you made in the book that fascinated me, seeing as we're on the topic of erotic dreams. I was sharing it with the team earlier. So there's 3 things here, but let's go one by one. So erotic dreams are not fueled by masturbation or pornography. Walk me through that.
That's what some reports a decade ago mentioned.
Right.
Now that might be changing. But what's interesting to me there is it's not what we do during the day that shows up in our erotic dreams. It's actually what we fantasize about secretly during our day that's more likely to show up in our erotic dreams. And scientifically, to me, I think that makes a lot of sense because the dreaming process is the imagination network liberated. So it makes sense that what you imagine in your dream life is more connected to the fantasy you're having while you're awake. It doesn't matter this act, this person, that what brings someone to climax, the thoughts they have during that process with their lover, without their lover. It's the internal thinking of desire during the day that tends to find itself in erotic dreams. And to me, that's consistent if you think about the dreaming brain as something that has the liberated imagination network. It's an imaginative process, right? Your eyes are closed. That movie you're making for yourself. So whatever you're thinking about during the day, that's the movie you're making at night.
So then going back to what you were saying earlier, though, if someone's in a happy relationship, but you're saying it's still common for them to cheat in their dreams.
That's a separate pattern, yeah.
Yeah, that's a pattern that you've seen. So is that an argument then that that person may be happy in their relationship, but then they're fantasizing?
I can't answer that. Because I love the question.
Yeah,
That's a deep question. What I would say to you is from there, what people ask is if you have dreams tend to have more. So does that mean you just haven't figured that out or you're not sharing that with somebody during the day? I can't answer that. But I think as we bring in more reports from dream banks and bring in more cultures, more backgrounds, more genders, and more diverse sort of perspectives, we'll get insights into that. But that's a very individual thing. So as a whole, there's a lot of cheating in erotic dreams. As a whole, what shows up in our erotic dreams is what we imagine. And then it leaves it to the person. That's why I opened with people have asked me if you dream of your ex, does that mean you really want them? I was like, well, if you're just seriously if you're hung up on them during the day and you dream about your ex, that means one thing. But if you're like, no, I've really moved on and a lover pops up in your dream, I think that's just a solar flare of desire. I wouldn't make much of that.
I think that's the hard part, right? I think what we don't know is how seriously
to take some of those
to
dreams.
take a dream or not. Because I feel like a lot of people, exactly like you just said, you have a dream about something, you're thinking, oh God, maybe I need that, maybe I don't. And is that a lack of self-awareness? Is it because the dream is not clear? How have you thought about that as you've reflected on dreaming? How do we get better at knowing whether to take a dream seriously or not? Because I feel like that would help solve so much of our conundrum or dilemmas that's created by dreams.
Yeah, it's a big question.
It's a big question.
It's a big question.
And I would love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, my opinion about it is that one, dreams should not be neglected. Okay. Nightmares, if they pop up and they arrive out of the blue, they shouldn't be neglected. I think dreams that are flashbacks after PTSD obviously should not be neglected. So there's some dreams that have an easier rule to follow, if you will. But then what about those other dreams that you're bringing up, right? Like intensely emotional, that linger with you during the day. And you're wondering wait a second, is that an insight to myself that I don't even have yet about myself? Should I discuss this with a therapist? Should I discuss this with my lover? And I think the way I've started to reflect on my dreams a bit more is that when they are hyper emotional, it's an invitation to look at your life differently. All right. I feel like I'm doing well. I'm high achieving. I'm doing this. I'm not, you feel like, no, it's fine. I'm dealing with a broken relationship. But if you start having nightmares or if you have emotional dreams that are filled with fright or regret, I'm not saying that there's never an automatic link, right? Other than showing up naked at a podium or alarm not going off. But the one that's powerful, haunts you, doesn't make sense. That's an invitation to think about something. And back to our original conversation, to me, that's a life well examined, is paying attention to the emotional, powerful dreams that you have that linger with you. The dream is symbolic, to get to your answer in the most specific way. The dream is a metaphor. The dream is symbolism. Because from the dreaming brain and you've hyper-visual, hyper-emotional, it's not going to spell it out for you. It's going to be metaphorical. It's going to be symbolic. specific example, Vietnam veterans who had PTSD got better. They start going through divorce. They're not, and they're struggling. They're not dreaming of divorce. They're dreaming of war again. So the experiences you're having, they're an invitation to reflect. The meaning is metaphorical and symbolic, all based on how the dreaming brain is built. And it's personal. It's hard to say a bridge or light bulb in your life at this moment is going to be the same meaning for me at this moment in my life, or my life 10 years from now, not just former versions of myself. So I'm not here to refute anything, but it's a very personal process. Your brain made it. It's a emotion to a hyper emotional state. It could mean nothing. It could mean something, but what I'm here to say is take a look at it.
Yeah.
It's not just static.
No, I think I completely agree with you. I think it's a great point. And I feel like it's really interesting because it then goes back to the idea that humans are meaning makers and that we're storytellers. And if you're looking at a metaphor, I
got a lot on that, man.
Then you're trying to figure it out. And if you have a negativity bias in your conscious mind, I wonder how much, like, I'll give an example. I was talking to someone the other day and they were saying that they'd been dreaming about bears. And so I started Googling what that means. And I was, going to ask you, and I was Googling about it. And it was really interesting because in a conscious state, a big bear feels scary and it feels like death and it feels like run away. And that's how they saw a bear in their dream. But then when you looked at the dream spiritual version, whatever you call it, when you look at dream interpretation, the interpretation of that was bears represent strength and they represent courage and they have this symbol in. And now I go, so it's a story, right? Yeah, it depends. Yeah, it depends.
Depends on which brain conjured up which image.
Yeah.
You work in the circus, bear means one thing. You're a hunter, bear means one thing. In culture, bear means something else. Yeah. So I like that. But just to go back to something that, I've been moving around and people have asked me stuff. The question you just asked is something special about, are we meaning makers? And now this is going to take me a little time to open up on this.
Please.
But what's interesting, and again, I don't have all the answers, this is conversation, is that in the dreaming brain, even though the logic and reason areas are dampened, specifically the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, it's right behind our sort of horns in the prefrontal cortex that pushed our brains forward. There's another area called the medial prefrontal cortex that's preserved. It stays throbbing. It's actually liberated a little bit. And you know what that one does? It does something we only figured out when we accidentally injure it or somebody has a stroke in that area. It stitches the story of our life together.
Hi, I'm Essie Cupp, and I've spent the last 20 plus years knee-deep in politics and the news. I've covered some really tough subjects, from war to genocide to 6 presidential elections, way too much Trump. And you know what? I need a break, like a mental health break from the news, from the triggering headlines. And I kind of suspect some of you listening out there might need a break too. So my new podcast is going to be just that, a fun and loose space where I talk to my famous friends and people I admire about all the stuff that consumes us when we're not consumed by politics.
I did not really rebel in the 60s. I had no sex in the 70s.
What?
I made no money in the 80s. So when true crime came along, I missed that trend too.
So many great guests are joining me, from Josh Mankiewicz to Larry Wilmore to Molly Jong Fast to Josh Gad.
I'm so excited that you have this platform, and I am just hoping that I don't destroy the platform in its earliest stages.
Listen to Off the Cup on the iHeart Radio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite shows.
Want to know how to leverage culture to build a successful business? Then Butternomics is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Brandon Butler, founder and CEO of Butter ATL. Over my career, I've built and helped run multiple 7-figure businesses that leverage culture and built successful brands. Now I want to share what I've learned with you. And on Butternomics, we go deep with today's most influential entrepreneurs, innovators, and business leaders to peel back the layers on how they use culture as the driving force in their business. On every episode, we get the inside scoop on how these leaders tap into culture to build something amazing. From exclusive interviews to business breakdowns, we'll explore the journey of turning passion for culture into business. Whether you're just getting started or an established business owner, Butternomics will give you what you need to take your game to the next level. This is Butternomics. Listen to Butternomics on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What's up, y'all? This is Questlove, and at QLS I get to hang out with my friends, Sugar Steve, Laia, Fontigolo, Unpaid Bill, and we, at Questlove Supreme like to nerd out and do deep dives with musicians and actors and politicians and journalists.
We give you the stories behind all your favorite artists and creatives that you have never heard. I'm talking about stories behind their life journeys and their works of art.
I love QLS because of the QLS Team Supreme. They're like a second family to me.
If you're a fan of deep diving into music, everything, almanacking your musical history, and learning things about hip-hop artists and things you never thought, then you're a lot like me. But you're also a fan of Questlove Supreme.
One of the things I love the most about this show is that we get to learn from the masters. I look at being on this show as my graduate program in music.
Listen to Questlove Supreme on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Suprema. Powerful, right?
Yeah.
And so what's happening? This is cool. What's happening is your emotions and your vision centers and your movement centers are just firing up stuff, linked directly, indirectly to the stuff you fed it during the day, the stuff your life fed it, right? Your life, your memory, plus the imagination. And then the medial prefrontal cortex is there putting a story to it. Dreams often, not always, are stories. They have a narrative component. They're emotional, they're visual, they have a narrative component. Our brains want to make a cohesive story. I know that for a lot of reasons. And the dreaming brain is something that also preserves that. And some have even extended that to like, well, maybe that's why we can, we get movies that have jumps of ideas. People go from one place to the other. Like our dreaming, the way we dream prepares us for the way we appreciate art, right? So we can let that go this way. On this side, some of my patients with certain complications and certain tumors and different things, they'll wake up and they won't feel certain parts of their body. And they'll develop something called neglect, or they'll develop something what is called confabulation. It's a fancy word for lying. When the body signals are disconjugate, they don't make sense, the brain, the mind, will make up a story to make it all fit. And some patients have actually tried to throw a leg they don't feel off the bed, and they say, oh, that was a stranger. And so you see things with the injured brain and the healing brain that there's a drive within us. Sometimes we'll even lie to ourselves and others to create a consistent or a story that makes sense to ourselves, meaning. And I think if you look at that at the brain level and you look at that at the dreaming level, what I try to tell people in my first book is look at that at the life level. Like our maturation isn't done just with adolescence, right? The work has to continue to cultivate your brain and your mind and your life. So when you get through a struggle and you get through it, that prepares you for the next one. If you're in a struggle now that's just overwhelming, like something difficult, so hard, don't worry because you're cultivating that stress for the next one. And I think all of those pieces, not measurements, but my opinion, that we are meaning makers. We are storytellers in the moments of our lives, in our dreaming brain, in our life in general. And the area where stories and emotions are the wildest, with our dreams. And that's why I think why we dream is something bigger than just threat rehearsal. I think it's something powerful. When we wake up and that clarity is because our subconscious has had its run.
Are people having, when you look at the data, are people having the same dream again and again and again, or are they having different dreams every night?
Well, that's a good question. So there are recurrent dreams. So a specific example, the only thing I can say with certainty is dreams come from our brain. We do these exotic brain surgeries where we wake people up to map the surface of their brain. You wouldn't know if I touched your brain if the situation ever arose, which it won't, but like the brain doesn't feel. The brain feels through its nerves. So we can dissect the brain in somebody while they're talking. The point there is not to scare anybody. That's a therapeutic process. But when we tickle and map the brain, they'll say, oh, I remember this nightmare from when I was a kid. You can activate a recurrent nightmare in a patient by tickling the surface of their brain. So dreams come from the brain. There are recurrent dreams. That's individual. There are common dreams across people, falling, being chased, teeth falling out. There are universal dreams. So you start to see all these patterns. A recurrent dream is a loop of electricity in that part of your brain that pops up again and again. It must be, because if we take a little faint pen and tickle it and you have that dream again, that's built into the electrical flows of your brain. So we have to step back a little bit when you ask those questions, because there are so many different dream types and dream experiences. I don't want to give a single answer, but recurrent dreams are loops of electricity that happen over and over again. We can actually activate that. And then universal dreams, common dreams, and rare dreams is how I conceptualize it.
What does someone do if they have a recurrent dream that they don't want to have anymore?
Big question. Okay, so let's look at that. So now we got the foundation, waking brain, dreaming brain, hyper-imaginative, hyper-emotional. You're creating the events of your dreamscape. And I found this to be very powerful, that nightmares, since we imagined them, the treatment for nightmares is something called imagery rehearsal therapy. Now, I'm not a therapist. I mean, I take care of a lot of cancer patients. I'm more than 10,000 in my life. So there's a cultivation that I have benefited from them trusting me. So I think I have some sense of understanding of human nature. But therapy, when you try to help somebody through conversation, talk therapy, right? That's great. It seems to be effective. That's out there. What they're finding is imagery rehearsal therapy is a new thing where imagine what you want to be. Imagine something you don't want to have. And when I read that, I was like, I don't know if I can sink my teeth in that, until I started reading about nightmares and learning about nightmares and across all different sciences, that if you practice before you go to bed, going back a bit to your saying that we can actually feed our dreams, if you practice a new script for the ending of your nightmares, you can re-script your nightmares through something called imagery rehearsal therapy. People can look it up. And not every time, not for everyone, but just the fact that nightmares can be re-scripted is powerful. That you think you're out of control, but you can feed your dreams, you can steer your dreams, and lucid dreaming is the prime example of that. And that therapy can guide you to a better conclusion of your dream. I love that as a scientist, because it's the imagination network. You've imagined this nightmare, and it's powerful to think now you can actually imagine a different kind of ending for this nightmare. To me, that's all scientifically consistent. And to me, that's why I think it's powerful to look at dreaming as more magical, more fascinating, that it is being driven by certain brain processes, right?
Yeah.
So you don't wake up and say, that's a glitch, that's static. No, there's something drove that. Learn about the engine behind it, and then reflect about the meaning about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can relate to that. I feel like there have been parts of my life where I've been able to code the emotion and feeling and script that I wake up with by what I put into the code before I go to bed. And so at one point in my life, when I was trying to wake up early and I didn't enjoy it, and my reaction to waking up early in the morning would be, I'm so tired. I just want to stay in bed. I just, and I wanted to wake up early. I believed that was a worthy pursuit and a habit to invest in. And so I would, before I went to bed, I would say to myself, I am waking up energized, happy, and healthy. And so even that re-scripting in the evening, I found I would wake up and I would be saying that to myself when I woke up. And there was this direct link between a script that I didn't have it written in the morning, I didn't have it there, but that repetition would carry over in the morning. And I found whenever I used it, it worked. And whenever I don't use it, I can still wake up and feel, oh God, why am I waking up so early? And so I've sensed moments of that, or I've had experiences of that. And that coding or that imagery rehearsal therapy that you mentioned, I would love for our audience to practice it, community to try it out and see how it shows up in your life. Because I think what we don't realize is you're subconsciously rehearsing anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Whatever you do,
the work is going on.
You're doing it.
Work with it.
Yeah. Whatever you're watching, reading, seeing, that is imagery rehearsal. It's just not therapy and it's not conscious. But we're doing imagery rehearsal throughout the day and before we go to bed.
And it adds a big question here. So when you say something like that, it ties into positive thinking, wish fulfillment, all these nebulous terms that I think some people really embrace, other people poo-poo and they say that can't be true. What I say is something in the middle, is that through studying about dreams and dreaming, I've learned about like what's the biology of how what you just described about. I think about something before I go to bed and it helps me wake up and I'm feeling it more. I'm thinking about it more in the right way. Like that's just out there, right? That feels like there's like a kite flying above our head. What I'm trying to get people to understand is the dreams, if they can be defined, are thoughts, emotions, and activities that are actually happening at the brain level. That's what's sparking all that electricity. If I'm running in a dream, the motor strip that moves my legs, the neurons there are firing. The signals just aren't getting through. So then what that does is it opens up a whole new world of athletes practicing the shot in their mind, positive reinforcement, going to bed and re-scripting your dreams, right? Journaling. Like people are like, okay, so there's brain activity that's leading to this mind that I want to get my mind to lean a certain way, and the brain activity is driving that. And so what's the people say, well, how that happened? I will give you the example of placebo. And so when you believe a medicine is going to help you, even if I tell you, look, there's nothing active in it. That's just like sugar. That's just something that has no capacity to change by the pill itself, the physiology of your body. But belief is enough to make people feel less pain. And I can give you a scientific explanation about how that happens. Belief, you're armed with neurotransmitters. That electricity that we're measuring, the chemicals that are floating around, think of the brain as like 100 billion microscopic jellyfish, and there's like electric storms and waves of neurotransmitters flying around in there. When you believe, the pharmacy of your mind is actually releasing chemicals and things that generates different electricity that alleviates pain, that prepares your brain and mind for re-scripting the nightmare, that gives you the scientific basis possibly for positive reinforcement, positive relationships. Like these are actually not just emotions, but they're working at the level of the brain. That's powerful.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that description. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about this. It's all coming back to an intentionality, a programming, like what I'm hearing from you is just this idea of get active, get involved, be conscious, be aware. I was thinking about, I remember during the pandemic, I probably hadn't, up until the pandemic, I probably hadn't watched TV or played video games for like 10 years, like consistently at all. And I think the pandemic kind of, had time and we were indoors and all the rest of it. And so I started watching TV. I remember one of the shows I was watching, which I really enjoyed watching, was Ozark. And I remember watching Ozark every day for 30 days in a row. And it's not even the scariest show. And while I was watching it, I probably didn't feel anything. And somehow I felt that I had a dream every night that my house was being broken into. Like that,
possible.
Yeah, that was an experience that I was having. And I connected the two because as someone who didn't have nightmares as an adult, and as someone who didn't watch that much TV, those were the only two changes that I had at least noticed.
Or if we get back to that, it's symbolic, maybe it's the stress of the pandemic. I mean, so it's never going to be pinned down exactly, but you're right. The paying attention to the patterns of your dreams, more than just a dream, unless it's hyper emotional, but the pattern of dreams, I think is an important thing to do. Like, and how does our waking life feed our dream life? What I would tell you is when color television arrived in magazines, the dream reports show a bump in people having colored dreams. Like there were more black and white dreams when TV was black and white. And I was like, wait, but the world is in color. And what I'm saying to you is that's why this topic is so fresh, because it doesn't all make sense. The science gives some insight and the exploration reveals there's so many things we don't understand. The take home is it's not a passive process. It's not something that is coming from the gods or omens. It's your brain giving you thoughts, emotions, dreams, and potentially insights that you can't have access to with your waking brain. And to me, that's a special portal. And how people cultivate that, I think it's up to them. I'm here to let people know that there's a rigorous science behind the brain biology, brain chemistry, brain electricity that drives dreaming.
Yeah, I mean, that bump in color television, I can't imagine when we have enough data to look at the social media bump.
Right.
Because to me, it's bizarre to feel that exposure to social media, pornography, being on the online world doesn't lead to specific or certain dreams. Like,
especially with the hours that people are putting in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that would be the next wave. And my hope is that somebody listening to this, you know, as I mentioned, I'm 51, I've got 3 sons, 18, 19, 22 in college. Like, my hope is somebody walks away and says, oh, wait, some of the stuff about dreams can be explained by the brain. Because imagine in 20, 30 years, how much more data we'll have through people with online dream banks and how much more we'll know about neuroscience. Imagine the connections that somebody sitting here playing different roles than us can make. And so it's more of it's an inception. I want people to be ignited that some parts of dreams can be made sense of.
Yeah. I want to dive back into nightmares because as a child, I grew up having a lot of nightmares. I remember one of them very vividly, even till today. I don't dream about it anymore, but I remember waking up in the middle of the night feeling horrified. And you talk about in the book how children have the most nightmares. Like, it's common. Children have 5 times as many nightmares as adults, you say. Even the gentlest childhood is no protection against nightmares. And I think that's really unnerving for parents when their kids are having nightmares. I have friends who have kids who will tell me like, oh God, she just doesn't sleep. She has nightmares. And it's like, you're trying to figure it out. And I mean, you're a father, so it's interesting to hear how you may have felt about that. I'm sure a lot of us listening right now are thinking, God, I definitely had nightmares as a kid. When you're having that as a kid, it can be so unnerving. It can be so difficult, even more than as an adult, because you really feel powerless. Have there been any therapies or remedies that have helped? But then you go on to say that nightmares are needed.
Right.
So walk me through that.
All right. So when I was thinking about this book, I was rolling around LA, going to different spots and sort of just bouncing around people, you know, regular people at Dodger Stadium. And often I got the question like, all right, you're going to talk about dreams and dreaming. You're going to have a new take on it. But clearly nightmares can't be good for you, right? There's no use for nightmares. And I thought I got to take this one head on in chapter 2. And so when I look at that, I would ask people to think of nightmares based on age. And we do that in the hospital and medicine and surgery and science where they're sort of age-related. Pediatric and adult is what I would say. We've talked about adults, flashbacks, nightmares if they arrive, pay attention to them. They could be a warning flare for some mental health issues. You get them more in depression. You know, we've left that. How to explain nightmares in kids is an exploration. It's a conversation. I think it's fresh. And I looked at a bunch of pieces that helped me sort of come up with an idea, a story, if you will. So if you look at the first thing about nightmares that struck me is you have to say, hey, Johnny, that was only a nightmare. It's only with nightmares that we tell our kids that's only a nightmare. So as a conversation, does that mean Johnny was blurring dreaming brain thoughts and waking brain thoughts until that moment? So that's a power. I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm leaving that with your audience. That's one. Nightmares do that. By definition, nightmares wake you up and they sear your memory. Okay. Just like our kids learn to walk and talk, our mind is being cultivated. So they had these families that signed all the kids up to be woken up and talk about their dreams for like 20 years in a row. They're called longitudinal. Kids, when they start talking, their dreams are like a table, a sweater. Then they get more imaginative. And what happens is 5, 6, 7, nightmares arrive. What else is arriving? They're developing visuospatial skills, and they're also developing this thing called theory of mind. People can look up these terms. That children at some point develop the ability to look at somebody and say, that smile, I don't think they mean well. Mind reading the other person's intention, right? That arrives, theory of mind, at the same time as nightmares. So my biggest way to conceptualize that is nightmares arrive in children to help them develop a sense of self versus other, help them, not a sense of identity, but that my thoughts and my experiences are mine, my waking life and dream life are separate. and that I need to think of myself as different from my uncles and aunts and other people around me. And I think that's the function of nightmares in children. You may have had them a lot, but they arrive, and then very few of them lead to nightmare disorder. Like, it doesn't ruin the next day. So it's almost sort of like, whereas in adults, nightmare disorder means the residue is lingering with you. So when you look at the patterns, children learn to walk and talk. Nightmares arrive around 4, 5, 6, and most of them go away. Erotic dreams around like 11, 12, 13 and persist in some way. Adolescence arrives around 15, 16. But these are cognitive changes. The brain looks about the same. It's not like a new lobe pops up. These are cognitive changes that are happening. So I think nightmares cultivate the mind in children. They arrive and fade. Things that happen that universally in science aren't accidental. And it's the dream we've always had, all of us have had, as a nightmare.
Yeah, that's super fascinating to me. Super fascinating. And it's
an
amazing.
Exploration. It's an exploration.
It's an exploration, yeah. And it's so interesting how we're so addicted to certainty and conclusiveness.
Yeah. It's kind of stifling.
Yeah, it's very
There's a rigidity
stifling.
to it, right?
Yeah.
Do this, don't do this. This will save you. This won't save you. Like, no. But the dreaming process leaves it open. Like,
yeah,
we're just beginning to understand. It's personal. Keep digging. Keep exploring. Fail better.
Yeah.
I think that's what that all shows us.
Why? I feel like what the conversation we're having exposes a weakness that we have across so many areas of our life, which is that we're uncomfortable with uncertainty.
Yeah.
And we constantly feel discomfort when we can't control. And I think dreams are like the ultimate version of that.
Dreams are like, hey, just to remind you, you need uncertainty.
Yeah.
Let me dig into that a little bit. I have some ideas about that. Like, when we fall asleep and dream, the executive networks dampen. Let me reverse a bit. Most of the day is something we call task on. It's outward. And the brain, the executive network, reason, logic is paying attention. Of course, food scarcity, right? Woolly mammoths, it makes sense. Those who are best at paying attention outward, navigating the world, and using as little amount of calories and brain energy, that seems like that would be a natural adaptation. Well, what I would tell people is, when we're not task on, the brain doesn't rev down like your computer, like goes, and then you have to hit the keyboard to pop it up. No, it creates a mental life of its own. Right? That's the imagination network. So during the day, we're mostly executive network outward. But if there's nothing to do, like with mind wandering or things are safe, we turn back into our own head. Dreaming is the example of that, but just suffused with like uncertainty. And so the question becomes, the day is so focused on thinking, calculating, adrenaline is up. Adrenaline finds the signal in the noise. They've done studies where they changed that. And then the dreaming brain is kind of the opposite. Adrenaline comes down. You're looking for looser patterns, divergent thinking, designing a car, not fixing an engine. To me, the uncertainty that the dreaming brain goes through, that's our genius built in. We actually don't want to become too rigid in our habits. It might be okay today, going on the freeway or going on the tube, as we mentioned, but that's not the process your brain needs to be in to be the most adaptive for heartache, for falling in love, for a kid getting sick, for the uncertainty the environment will give us, and the uncertainty we almost want to engage in love affairs and adventures. I think that's the balance. Get things done. Try not to be too rigid, try to be open-minded, and appreciate that your dreaming brain's going to take you there whether you want it or not. That's the love story of uncertainty and creativity.
Hey, I'm Jacqueline Thomas, the host of a brand new Black Effect original series, Black Lit, the podcast for diving deep into the rich world of Black literature. I'm Jacqueline Thomas, and I'm inviting you to join me and a vibrant community of literary enthusiasts dedicated to protecting and celebrating our stories. Black Lit is for the page turners, for those who listen to audiobooks while commuting or running errands, for those who find themselves seeking solace, wisdom, and refuge between the chapters. From thought-provoking novels to powerful poetry, we'll explore the stories that shape our culture. Together, we'll dissect classics and contemporary works while uncovering uncovering the stories of the brilliant writers behind them. Blacklit is here to amplify the voices of Black writers and to bring their words to life. Listen to Blacklit on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, I'm Gianna Prudenti.
And I'm Janae Jackson Gadsden. We're the hosts of Let's Talk Offline, a new podcast from LinkedIn News and iHeart Podcasts.
When you're just starting out in your career, you have a lot of questions, like how do I speak up when I'm feeling overwhelmed?
Or, can I negotiate a higher salary if this is my first real job? Girl, yes.
Each week, we answer your unfiltered work questions.
Think of us as your work besties you can turn to for advice.
And if we don't know the answer, we bring in experts who do, like resume specialist Morgan Sanner.
The only difference between the person who doesn't get the job and the person who gets the job is usually who applies.
Yeah, I think a lot about that quote. What is it? Like, you miss 100% of the shots you never take?
Yeah, rejection is scary, but it's better than you rejecting yourself.
Together, we'll share what it really takes to thrive in the early years of your career,
without sacrificing your sanity or sleep.
Listen to Let's Talk Offline on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
When you find that bright spot to help you get through your day, it's powerful.
That's where The Bright Side comes in, a new daily podcast from Hello Sunshine that's bringing you a daily dose of joy. I'm Danielle Robay.
And I'm Simone Boyce. Listen, both Danielle and I are reporters. We've covered the news and we know the world can feel heavy. But the Bright Side podcast is a space to have a little fun, to learn something new, and get into some friendly debates.
That's right. Join us 5 days a week to see how life can look from the bright side. We'll hear from celebrities, authors, experts, and listeners like you.
Whether it's relationships, friend advice, or figuring out how to navigate life's transitions, we'll talk through it all together.
Listen to The Bright Side from Hello Sunshine every weekday on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, and it's I'm going to flip-flop because we talked about uncertainty and creativity, but I want to go into lucid dreaming and this idea of wanting some control in the uncertainty. But before we get there, I wanted to go back to sleep exit because I don't think we talked about sleep entry, but we didn't finish sleep exit.
And that works because sleep exit, that dampened executive network, that dampened adrenaline that looks for the signal and noise, it seems to come back on. And if an alarm goes off, we know it comes back on. Like, you can be dreaming and sleeping, you smell smoke, the executive network is the boss. It will pop back on and dominate. And so if you do grab your phone in the morning and check emails too quickly or jump on Instagram, like, your brain will go to that forward task on feature. And the residue or the lingering feelings of your dream life will necessarily be put in the back seat. And so if you do want to remember your dreams more as you wake up, if you have the luxury of a bed and time and not an alarm, that's a critical window, sleep exit, to sort of hold on to your dream thoughts and your dream experiences. It's an imperfect process, but I can tell you people who have tried, they get better at it. And again, it's free, it's accessible, it's from your own brain. I think it's one of those habits that I've incorporated in my life for the last 5-10 years. I get
So
up.
what exactly? Yeah, what exactly?
So what I do is, if I have the luxury, because I do now, I didn't for a long time. I mean, the phone calls and pagers are going off in the middle of the night. And now it's more like, if I wake up in the morning, I try to linger and I try not to move. And there's different types of yoga. People have been talking about a lot of stuff like this for centuries and millennia. And I'm just adding some scientific pieces that support it, but that I'm trying to not have my executive network kick in. I'll keep my eyes closed. I'll run through some thoughts. Oh, that's interesting. Hold on to that. Why should I do that? Like I have my sleep exit thinking or moments, if you will. And then I'll reach over and I'll go to my notes app. It's right on the home screen, and I'll write a few things down. When I have ideas, I mean, I'd say a great majority have come from them. They're almost all bad ideas, but that is the idea generator. If I've had a good idea, it's been during that time. It's rarely like at 2:00 on a triple espresso, right? That's important because we have to get things done. But the dreaming process, sleep entries we talked about, and sleep exit, I think are interesting portals where there are sort of blurry liminal states that we have a different type of thinking without it being just like wildly psychedelic. You know, it's measured, but it's a fresh perspective. It's a different take on the things that are important in your life at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, even the language of sleep entry and sleep exit is so powerful.
Well, I gotta, but this calls hypnagogic and hypnopompic. So the first thing I'm out there is like, stop using these words that suck, right? They're like
Those
confuse
words
people.
are terrible. Yeah, I'm so glad you didn't use it. Yeah, I mean, like,
Yeah.
but even hearing you say, I've never heard the word sleep entry and sleep exit before.
Yeah,
and I
framing it
personally
differently.
really like that language because I think we don't think about it like that, and it's so funny how we enter buildings, we leave
Yeah.
buildings, we enter spaces, we leave spaces, and sleep is kind of like that. And we are talking about evening routines and morning routines, but this
Never
is
the-
almost a bit more intimate to both sides of that.
It's the essential routine. Now, just sleep entry and sleep exit. What I love about it is that I can put stickers on your scalp, our scalps, and record the electricity and be like, look, the waves change. You are measurably, not just by report, like, hey, I'm feeling different. I get that. I trust that. That's individual. But the brain waves during sleep entry and sleep exit have a pattern. They overlap in a way that never happens while you're awake or while you're dreaming.
Mm.
Right? So like that's what I want people to walk away with. Like, it's not just his thing. He's looking at the fact that he can measure that this is a different space right now.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that doesn't mean it's powerful or not. That's for you to figure out. But we can measure sleep entry and sleep exit, and it looks different on a 24-hour cycle of brainwaves.
And how long does it last?
Well, it's different for different people, and people seem to cultivate it. But Salvador Dali, he's written about it, said, anywhere from 2 to 12 minutes.
That's how long you have.
Yeah, but it's personal, but it's real. And it's for everybody to figure out for themselves,
But I like the 2 to 12 minutes. It gives us a gauge
Sure.
as to how long do you not let your executive brain turn on in the morning.
And because there's science, there's tech companies coming up with a little, your iPhone or Apple Watch is tracking your stages of sleep. And when people are in that sleep entry, it'll buzz them to wake up, like Dolly tried. And that's their way of write down what you're thinking now as sort of the tech approach to creativity. It's interesting, right?
Talking about the tech approach, again, another tangent, because it's so
Yeah, yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
I'm like completely obliterated any form of structure, but it's great. Where do you see the cross-section of AI and dreams? Like, where can it be useful? Where will it be helpful with this? Where will it not? Will it help us ask better questions? Is it going to help us take better notes? Is it going to help us?
I don't know. I'm not a computer scientist, but I'll tell you two things. They're making programs that add noise because sometimes the patterns and algorithms of computers become so rigid, like our daily thinking, that they can't handle the insertion of new data. And that sort of mirrors what's going on. Like it's called overfitted. The computer process and algorithm design is too tight, too efficient. And that learning from dreaming, they find that the computer system is more adaptive when they add in noise. Where artificial intelligence fits in, I'm not sure, but tech is all over it. They're tracking the data from smartphones and certain people. You're volunteering. They'll play certain songs and they'll have people watch commercials and see if they dream about it more and then buy that product more. Like, that space is here. So if somebody's listening, like, that's a massive space. And I just think I would remind people that we're not completely shut off when we dream. We wake up to alarms and smoke, and that we should be careful about in that vulnerable, precious, remarkable, and unique state that somebody's not just taking marketing advantage of it. And I think that's where AI will extract data, figure out what's the right buzz, the right sound. And just to riff on this a little bit, like 100 years ago, they were like, people were asleep and they'd put their hand in like a bucket of water to see if they had more dreams about water. In the modern version, they're going to be taking your data and trying to fine tune like the song, the scent, and the picture to put, to throw at you to try to get you to buy stuff. So
Oh my God.
I'm a bit like dystopian about that because I don't want, I'm private, especially in my dream life.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I feel like some of my favorite movies have been about dreams. You mentioned Inception. Even, this isn't about dreams, but still in that space of Vanilla Sky.
Yeah.
With Tom Cruise and Cameron Diaz. That movie, if you've not seen it, it's probably one of my favorites, and just how that memory bank or some sort of like subconscious bank is created and held. And it's fascinating thinking about that. There's a few more things, Rahul, that I want to go over with you from the book, which I think are so interesting for people. I want to talk to you about, before we get into lucid dreaming, I want to talk to you a bit about how dreams can predict the future. And I think a lot of people worry that their dreams, their thoughts can create reality. subconsciously somewhere we feel that. Like, I know people who have illnesses who are like, oh, I manifested this, like I made this happen, or like I have a disease and oh my God, I saw this coming, or you know, that kind of feeling.
Warning dreams.
Yeah, warning dreams. And that almost feels a bit worrying as well, because often when you have that warning, you're now constantly replaying it and thinking about it while you're awake and while you're asleep. Can dreams predict the future, especially when it comes to health?
In one specific way, dreams can absolutely predict the future of your health. And we'll get into that. That's Parkinson's. But in general, for cancer, for other diseases, it's hard to tease out whether my patients had the diagnosis and then sort of reverse thought, like, I think I had a dream about that. I'm not judging them. I'm just totally open-minded, but I can't grip the data on that. But if you do have a dream about disease, statistically, you're not more likely to have that disease. They've been looking at these surveys. So it might just reveal a certain anxiety you're having. Again, symbolic. You might be struggling with something and then have a disease-based dream. So as long as we remember that most of the time they're symbolic and not literal, I think that's important. There are plenty of reports and surveys where breast cancer patients have said, like, I had a dream, I felt a lump and these sort of things. I respect that. I respect their whole journey. So I want to put that out there. The one specific way that dreams can predict the future, I need to unpack this one for a little bit because this was mind-blowing when I learned about it. There's something called REM behavior disorder, which I'm relabeling dream enactment behavior. Yeah, my world.
Thank you, Rahul.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
My world, the words are they confuse, you know. Dream enactment behavior. Middle-aged men, 50s, acting out their dream, usually protecting their bed partner. They come in, the bed partner maybe has an injury. Those men, 94% of the time, and that's essentially in medicine, it's universal, 15 years later will develop Parkinson's. I think, you know, so that is the one example. And if it's the only example for every neuroscientist out there, every scientist out there, hear me with this, that the first warning flare of the brain's deterioration with Parkinson's is a change in dreams 15 years ago. I'll just leave it at that. For all the rigorous people out there saying, hey, they're talking about stuff like I'm questioning whether the science can really show this. Look up REM behavior disorder, all caps REM behavior disorder, which I call dream enactment behavior. It's in Scientific American. This isn't like one paper I'm digging up. Like this is stuff that's coming out. REM behavior disorder predicts Parkinson's 15 years later. And what I would say to the researchers out there is that an opportunity for us to start with medicine earlier? I mean, it just says so much. But outside of that one, and all you need is one unicorn for unicorns to be real, I haven't found any evidence that dreams predict the future. I mean, they definitely don't give you lottery numbers and stuff like that. But at a more grounded level, they don't necessarily predict what's going to happen to you. But what happens to you maybe because of what the dream is symbolically mentioning. You're going through a difficult time and you lose your job and you have a dream about losing your job. So I can see where those connections would form. I just don't have any. So I'll leave it as a maybe.
It's so interesting how, again, it goes back to this idea of when you get a diagnosis or something happens, you then go back to finding that point. Like, it's almost like you've been dating someone and you knew they were wrong, and then when they break up with you, you're like, I knew it.
You replay it all.
Yeah, you replay it, and then you
That's
see all the red flags. And again, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's that feeling of I remember and I know, but we're not always good at trusting our gut in that moment. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's not a feeling of. It's almost like, again, and I'm not discounting anyone's experience, but I find even I do it where you're living your life and then something happens and you go, oh, I knew it. There was a part of you that sensed it.
So I would call that hunch and instinct.
Yeah.
And I think we connect, if I may.
Yeah, please.
In the moment as we navigate uncertainty, and because we're not just reflexive creatures, right? There's this thing called counterfactual thinking. Like, I can run out, if this happens, then that. I can play scenarios out. And you know what does that? The imagination network. The same thing that's liberating dreaming. We create a mental workspace. What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this doesn't happen? As we navigate the uncertainty. So it's not just, pull back from a hot frying pan or, pull back from a scorching rock if you're a lizard, right? Those are reflexes. We have the ability to choose. And I think when you look at what you're saying about hunch and instinct and how we kind of knew something and we should have maybe paid more attention to it, I think that for me, that's in the rear view. When you're in the moment and things are imperfect as they often are, I believe that you are trying to create the outcome out of that imperfect situation. And when it doesn't arise or it doesn't arrive for you, so we do look back and say, hey, maybe we should have done things differently. That is the cost of the freedom of choice that we have right now, what to do, whether to grab this glass or not. And just like heartache is the cost of exposing yourself to falling in love, and I'm familiar with that. So I think people should look at that as like, that's what makes life exciting. Yeah.
Have you seen any connection between alcohol and dreams?
Well, this is a big question. So this is a notable thing that I left out of the book. I have patients waking up from anesthesia. I'm floating above dissociative states, like psychedelic experiences, ambient dreams, fentanyl dreams, alcohol suppresses dreams. People who smoke weed, marijuana users in the morning, they don't remember their dreams. I couldn't find it definitely affects dreaming. To me, that says two things. Dreams are coming from the brain. You take drugs and your dreams change. They're biological. And the second thing is I couldn't find a way to say antidepressants make this change your dreams. Coke and meth makes this change.
And alcohol as well.
And alcohol. I just couldn't find something to wrap it around. Yeah. And I tried because I was like, that's going to be one of the chapters. And I just, I didn't find a clear link except for one. Galantamine is this drug we give patients with dementia. It works on acetylcholine. It's one of the less famous neurotransmitters. We have a lot. They do a lot. It's not dopamine does this. It's not that linear as we're seeing now and liberating people now, is galantamine. And so those people, they take it and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm becoming aware. I'm dreaming while I'm dreaming. That's lucid dreaming. You double that dose, they have more lucid dreaming. And in the world of science, that dose-dependent escalation is as close as you get to, cause and effect. So drugs definitely affect the brain. I just couldn't put them into neat categories because people on antidepressants had this type of dream. People did coke, the next day they had a different type of dream. So that is a mixed bag. And alcohol is part of that. It's, it's a chemical.
Do you think we'll ever get closer to understanding the links more deeply as the memory banks, dream banks grow?
I hope so. I hope so. And I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
The things that I'm looking at are what were available to me. Everywhere from Aristotle a few thousand years ago to stuff happening now to questionnaires from 20 years ago. It's, of course, necessarily it's imperfect. But I think as people are more honest and
that's the
liberated to fill the dream banks in with this stuff, somebody after me is going to take that and say, ooh, I think alcohol does this and antidepressants do this. I think it's quite possible, but just to let everybody know, I'm working with what's out there and trying to connect the dots between the gaps of from philosophy to brain science to YouTube, ambient dreams. I'm really trying to bring it together from every corner that I could look at.
Yeah. How much do we dream in events in reality versus completely fantasy-based events? How much of our dreams are replaying? Like you were saying that the veterans, for example, they dream about the war. That's like a real event that happened in their life.
So that's a flashback.
Yeah, it's a flashback. Yeah. So,
but when they dream about it when they're getting divorced, that's a symbolic dream.
Yeah,
representing something.
What's the kind of breakdown of dreams of flashbacks versus fantasy?
I think PTSD flashbacks are clearly replay of a bad experience in your dreamscape. The imaginative component of dreams, when you look at these surveys, it's a complete mixed bag. But what I will tell you is that I'm trying to just add the information here to your question, which is a good one. But how much of our dream life is a replay versus just completely cooked up by the imagination network? I get that. That's a good question. And what I would say is, in flashbacks, it's a replay. If your dream is falling, that's not a replay, but indicative of something. And then there's most stuff is in between. It's highly visual, highly creative, jumping from social situations to visual situations. You're on the top of a building, you're in an awkward situation, you're fighting with something. There are these jumps, a little bit movie-like, but it's not a hallucination. And this is the best, because I wanted to be able to answer this question like 2 years ago when I was thinking of this. And this is the gem that I found. When you hallucinate, just bear with me, it's a purple elephant in this room. The landscape is reality. The element is inserted in it. In dreaming, the whole thing is imagined. And so I would say the entire process of dreaming leans heavily imaginative. Got it. That's the best answer I can give.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer. Yeah, no, it's interesting to me because I always wonder, like, do we ever dream in a space we've been in and seen in, and even
all of it. I think all of it. I mean, so you have memory of places you've been, and then you can imagine, and dreaming has access to both of that. And if I may, the dreaming memory, like when you get up to go to the bathroom, and sometimes you can slip back into a dream. So it's not random. And so I always wonder, is there like access to memory our dreaming mind can have that our waking mind does not have access to? Like people with, this is fascinating, like this little bit heavier on the science part, like people who have memory issues, like they've had a trauma and they can't remember. If they play Tetris or a video game, they'll see pictures of it in their dreams, but can't tell you about it. When you ask them during the day, they'll say, no, I never played a Tetris game, but I had one in my dream. And they're basically playing, their Tetris is being played in front of them. So there's something going on where the dreaming mind has a memory system, I think. I don't have evidence for this, but there are little dots like that, like slipping back into a dream, getting up to go to the bathroom, people with amnesia being able to feed their dreams. I can't identify it like on a map or a dissection, but there's something unique going on with the dreaming memory and dreaming mind. And that's why it's so inspiring for me. Like, I use drills and take off pieces of skull and I dissect with them. I'm not that guy, right? Most people would think. I think that's why it's powerful. Like brain surgeons talking about the dreaming mind.
Yeah.
But that's what it's done for me, my man, is like 51 years in, 10,000 patients, operating in like 10 countries, sons, wild love affair, heartbreak, all of it, intense relationship with my partner for 30 years, like all of it. And you start to think like, I think I'm getting a sense. And then putting this book together, it's almost like a rebirth. It's too much of a statement, but like, oh, wait a second. There's a dreaming mind memory system. Wait a second. Parkinson's, the first flare is a change in dreaming patterns. So just when I thought like, I think I'm figuring this out, I'm excited to have the lens with which I approach the world reset. Yeah. And that's what dreaming has done for me.
Let's talk about lucid dreaming. We've been kind of like peppering it in the whole time. First of all, let's just define, and a lot of the questions I ask are very simplified. And the reason for that is because I think a lot of these terms, ideas are out there and most people don't even know. And I think as you're simplifying language from a very scientific point of view, my goal is to try and simplify topics that we all hear about, and you might even hear about in a conversation and you're sitting there going, I don't even know what that means.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone knows what that means, but we're all pretending to know. So it's like, what is lucid dreaming? How common is it? And then how do we do it? So let's go through those three phases.
Get emotional with me, Radhi Devlukia, in my new podcast, A Really Good Cry. We're going to talk about and go through all the things that are sometimes difficult to process alone. We're going to go over how to regulate your emotions, diving deep into holistic personal development, and just building your mindset to have a happier, healthier life. We're going to be talking with some of my best friends.
I didn't know we were going to go there on this.
People that I admire.
When we say listen to your body, really tune into what's going on.
Authors of books that have changed my life.
Now you're talking about sympathy, which is different than empathy, right?
And basically have conversations that can help us get through this crazy thing we call life.
I already believe in myself. I already see myself. And so when people give me an opportunity, I'm just like, oh, great, you see me too.
We'll laugh together, we'll cry together, and find a way through all of our emotions. Never forget, it's okay to cry, as long as you make it a really good one. Listen to A Really Good Cry with Radhi Devlukia on the iHeartRadio app. Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome to the Overcomfort Podcast with Jenica Lopez. Yup, that's me. You may know my late mom, Jenny Rivera, my queen. She's been my guiding light as I bring you a new season of Overcomfort Podcast. This season, I'll continue to discover and encourage you and me to get out of our comfort zones and choose our calling. Join me as I dive into conversations that will inspire you, challenge you, and bring you healing. We're on this journey together. I'm opening up about my life and telling my story in my own words. Yes, you'll hear it from me first before the cheeseman lands on your social media feed. If you thought you knew everything, guess again. So I took another test with Ancestry, and it told me a lot about who I am. And it led me to my biological father. And everyone here, my friends laugh, but I'm Puerto Rican. Listen to the Overcomfort Podcast with Jenica Lopez as part of My Cultura podcast network, available on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Across Generations, where the voices of Black women unite in powerful conversations. I'm your host, Tiffany Cross. I want you all to join me and be a part of sisterhood, friendship, wisdom, and laughter. In every episode, we gather a seasoned elder.
But even with a child, there's no such thing as the wrong thing if you love them.
Myself, as the middle generation. I don't feel like I have to get married at this big age in life, but it is a desire I have and something that I've navigated in dating. And a vibrant young soul for engaging intergenerational conversations.
I'm very jealous of your generation that didn't have to deal with Instagram and Tinder.
This is Across Generations, where Black women's voices unite, and together, you know how we do, we create magic. Listen to Across Generations podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Lucid dreaming, here's the way I would explain it to you. First, a little bit of a story about it. When I was constructing this book, I said, lucid dreaming, oh no, I don't want to cover this. There can't be any science for it. 2 out of 9 chapters are on lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
And so again, that's a